Good? Everybody good? Well, hello. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. The second day of the Radical Book Fair. It's wonderful to see so many people show up for what's going to be a really important and I think pretty invigorating conversation with three wonderful, wonderful people. I am going to just introduce everybody, and then we're going to have a couple of pretty exciting videos and a performance, and then we're going to have a chat. And at the end, there's going to be time for about 15 minutes of audience questions. So if you do have anything you'd like to ask our wonderful panelists, make sure that you get those brains ticking now. My name is Jess Brough, and I am joined by Janine Booth, Patricia MacDonald, and Clementine E. Burnley. Clementine is a feminist, migrant mother, writer, and trainee psychotherapist. She lives in Edinburgh. Her work has appeared or is upcoming in Magma, the Poetry Review, and the 2022 Flipped Eye anthology, Before Then, We. She's a 2021 Royal Society of Literature Sky Arts Award winner, an alumnus of Obsidian Foundation, and a 2021 Edwin Morgan Second Life grantee. Janine Booth is a Marxist motormouth who travels the UK and beyond reciting ranting, rhyming, and revolting poetry at gigs, festivals, and picket lines, tackling subjects from sexual violence to mental health, the Grenfell Tower fire to hating Tories. She is also an activist and trade unionist, RMT striker. Her non-poetry books include Minnie Lansbury, Suffragette, Socialist, Rebel Counsellor, Autism Equality in the Workplace, Removing Barriers and Challenging Discrimination, Plundering London Underground, New Labour, Private Capital and Public Service, and Guilty and Proud of It, Poplars, Rebel Counsellors and Guardians. She has plenty to say about art, particularly poetry and punk, and resistance, and comes to us straight from supporting punk legends, the Newtown Neurotics at the Voodoo Rooms the previous evening. How was that? Pretty good. Patricia MacDonald is an environmental cultural landscape researcher, writer, and academic. Since 2004, honorary fellow at the University of Edinburgh and the Edinburgh College of Art. And Patricia is also an award-winning artist photographer. Her powerful, boundary-crossing environmental aerial imagery, made in collaboration with her partner, Professor Angus MacDonald, also of the University of Edinburgh, is commissioned, exhibited, and published internationally, spanning fine art and editorial contexts. She is the author, co-author, and editor of 10 books and catalogues, including Shadow of Heaven, Order and Chaos, Views of Gaia, Once in Europa, Einst in Europa, Airworks, and the Hebrides, an aerial view of cultural landscape with Angus MacDonald, and Surveying the Anthropocene, Environment and Photography Now, which is the very heavy book that is on my lap, the beautifully heavy book. So before we kind of get into our conversation, I think we're going to kick things off with a film from Clementine. And before we do that, please join me in welcoming these wonderful people to the stage. Thanks very much.
So in tears will weep cries of joy. He who goes out weeping as he carries his sack of seed will come home with cries of joy as he carries his grain in sheaves.
When I was at university, we studied Scottish literature as a post-colonial literature. I studied Canadian literature as well, also as a post-colonial literature. We didn't study Scotland as a colonial power.
Schottland ist wirklich anders.
That was the show, we met in Waverley and we finished in Central Station. And I described Glasgow as the second city of the Empire. As like knowing that it wasn't uncomplicated, a proud thing. But you know, for the time, knowing that it wasn't uncomplicated, very important place. But you know, for the time, it was very important. It was a very important place in Glasgow, and I do not feel like that now.
Adonai is strength for his people, a stronghold of salvation to his anointed. Save your people and carry them, and bless your heritage. Shepherd them, carry them. Shepherd them, shepherd them, and carry them forever, and carry them.
Beautiful, thanks very much. We're going to stop the video there. That was wonderful. I'm just going to... we're going to have a break from the video content for a live performance from the one and only Janine Booth. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Cheers. I'm going to do you a long, angry poem. It's a long, angry poem about the Grenfell Tower fire. And it has a Dickensian title and opening. It's called A Tale of Two Cities, the Rich and the Towerful. It was the best of times and the worst of times. And the north of the borough gets the worst because of accidents of birth and because that's just the way it works. And yes, you guessed, the south gets the best. And the rest of the country only registered that Kensington had a proletariat when it shocked the commentariat by electing a Labour MP 5 nights before a fire on the 4th floor spread faster and further than it was supposed to do and grew from its room and consumed and entombed a tower full of humans. The rich and the powerful were unscorched, untorched, untouched, unburned, unburdened by losing pretty much everything. Until then, most folks thought that Kensington hosted mostly royals and billionaires, not the toilers, but the heirs and your graces, in palaces and similar places and with more money than you could possibly know what to do with. And skeletons. They knew that Kensington had skeletons. Skeletons in its museums, skeletons in its graveyards, and now the skeleton of what hundreds of people used to call home calls out the skeletons from the cluttered cupboards of the town hall, stubborn behind a firewall, a smoke screen, wiped clean by the dinosaurs of class rule, the bores and the fools who rush and stomp around, crushing lesser life forms into the ground. The rich and the powerful tightened our belts, but not their own, and a tower full of people lost their life or their home. The rich don't live in tower blocks or social housing stocks. When they reside in tall buildings, they are called luxury developments, with opulent embellishments and panoramic views from the penthouse, not a cheap-to-rent house, nor a worn and spent house, high flyers in high rises at high prices, high status in high places. They don't live in flats, they live in apartments. They live apart in fire-resistant compartments with state-of-the-art smoke alarms. And so they should. They're entitled to a fire escape, a safe space, a comfortable place to live, but so is everyone. And you can be sure that in every apartment, on every floor, there is a sprinkler system. And that if there is cladding, then it's gilded wrapping with all the trappings, not lined with aluminium, the bare minimum. Second best, failed the test, discounted price, discounted advice, discounted concerns about how fast it burns. Skin flint, say yes, skint. Cheap as chips and about as good for you, off the back of a lorry and onto the walls of the towers in the sky where the common people come to live and die. The rich and the powerful get their riches and their power from the labours of the powerful and their neighbours and people like them, like us. The first named dead had fled a war zone. He wanted to go home when the war was done. He was learning skills to help rebuild, but he was killed under enemy fire. People die like this when people live like this, squashed into boxes in tower blocks, put up on the cheap, putting up people, keeping the least possible cost per life lost, per square metre or square feet of prime real estate, a drain on the rates. People die like this because people are made to live like this, by a system that gives only to the few, not a civilised living to the likes of you, a system like this run by spivs for hire who wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire. The rich and the powerful keep their riches and their power while a tower full of humanity, of friendship and of family, of talent and potential, of working class folk goes up in smoke. It's always the people in the cheap seats, in steerage, the lower orders, the servants' quarters, the backstairs, the disrepairs, the slum colony, travelling through life in economy class, the wage slaves, not the masters, the underclasses. And what of those who run this system? The decision takers, the policy makers, the architects of TMOs and ALMOs and scrapping, rent capping and right to buy and buy to let, and let's get by on whatever we can get, a bed, a roof above our head, a home not fit for habitation, voted down the legislation, closed the fire station. Compassion fakers, quick to forsake us. In Kensington or Westminster, hold the line, then resign, anything to avoid responsibility, anything to pass the blame. Heads must roll, heads must hang in shame. The rich and the powerful give the victims the body swerve. They've got a nerve, while the powerful get donations from neighbours and from strangers that fill the community centre shelves, given by people a little less unfortunate than themselves. The rich and the powerful close the doors in the faces of you and yours to talk about the powerful and sanitise the cause of death and destitution on 24 floors.
Thank you very much for that, Janine. We're now going to have a short video following this beautiful book from Patricia.
My name is Patricia MacDonald, and I'm the editor of the book Surveying the Anthropocene, Environment and Photography Now, published by Studies in Photography in partnership with Edinburgh University Press. The book is an international survey that investigates image making concerning human-caused environmental change by some of the best artist photographers working worldwide, with a strong representation from Scotland, placed alongside text by some of the most illuminating writers on environmental questions, for example, Adam Nicholson. It reflects a great many aspects of tonight's theme of art and resistance. It reviews the range of working practices of artist photographers exploring the present multiple interlinked crises and impacts on climate, on environmental justice, and on the web of life that are sufficiently significant and globally widespread to appear in the future record of the rocks as a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene. The word Anthropocene has become a synonym for extensive global environmental change caused by human activity, and the concept has engaged the attention and imagination of a wide range of commentators from very different backgrounds. So it provides an excellent context for cross-disciplinary discussion of the spectrum of responses of artist photographers and cultural writers to our present global situation, and of some of the options and stories of human ingenuity in addressing these. Moving on to my own practice as an artist photographer, and in terms of tonight's theme of art and resistance, I make images exposing environmental damage, some obvious and sudden, although they may also have further long-term consequences, and others, much harder to picture, the results of what the writer Rob Nixon has called slow violence. And I also record environmental regeneration and rewilding by means of rephotography, both from ground level and from the air. Much of the work on the book Surveying the Anthropocene was done online from a variety of locations where I had other environmental projects. Many of these involve collaboration with my partner, Professor Angus MacDonald, through our not-for-profit organisation, Aerographica. For about 3 decades, we have operated a light aircraft across rugged terrain from the Scottish Highlands and Islands and as far as North Africa. We always plan to work safely and in good weather, but sometimes this deteriorates, leaving us flying in difficult circumstances like those we see here, so it can be quite challenging at times. Our Aerographica partnership specialises in environment-related aerial editorial publications and art projects, and in the interpretation, mainly using aerial forensic imagery of cultural landscapes, especially landscapes that appear to many people to be wild, but which have in fact been ecologically degraded by human activity over long periods of time, a world of wounds invisible to many people. Often this process involves overgrazing by excessive populations of domestic animals or of the semi-wild deer maintained for hunting purposes. The evidence of this is often much clearer from the air. For example, grazing animals cannot reach trees on islands or in deep gullies, so trees survive there in otherwise treeless landscapes. Another widespread example of damaging activity is the intensive burning of vegetation as part of the brutal management of grouse moors, which causes floods and pollution in other locations downstream, which kills wildlife and which prevents the regeneration of trees. We see here my large composite artwork piece entitled Burnt Moorland Grouse Shooting, about this practice. It is a deadly board game dealing with issues of wild and unwild, freedom and constraint, hunting and being hunted, and the juxtaposition of 2 contrasting paradigms or modes of understanding. Due to widespread pressure, the Scottish Government, although not the Westminster Government, is now about to introduce the licensing of grouse moors, which may help the situation. Other projects, as here in the Cairngorms in Glenfeshie on the banks of its famous braided river, demonstrate more positive developments. Here, high numbers of semi-wild deer have recently been greatly reduced, enabling an important remnant of Caledonian pinewood, which was dying on its feet due to all the young seedlings being eaten by browsing deer, to regenerate naturally, and so improve carbon capture, biodiversity, and in time, the range of types of employment locally. And in some of the examples that we've just seen, And returning to the broader canvas of the book, Surveying the Anthropocene, Scotland represents a tiny microcosm of the problems and possible solutions in other parts of the world with similar histories of anthropogenic ecological degradation. The front and back covers of the book show two possible outcomes for one iconic species of human choices between the business as usual scenario and that of effective environmental resistance. Thank you.
I'm so glad that we were able to see some of those photos up large on the screen. This book is full of really eye-wateringly amazing photography. And in fact, all three of you create art that is so affecting that it has the potential to really, bring someone to tears. But that's not the end of the story. I think something that comes up in the book literally is this notion that other futures are possible. And I'd love to know a little bit about how the three of you approach or think about that side of things, the future, the other futures that are possible beyond what we're facing now, beyond what we are resisting. Clementine, why don't we hear from you first? Just because you're nodding and you're in the middle.
I'll know not to do that next time. Yes, actually, the next thing that I'm about to do is a seminar on Black geographies, on Afrofuturism, because I think that once I hit 50, my attitude changed to how I was working, and I think I take a much more long-term view now, and I really think about what legacy always sounds so grand that I don't want to say it, but actually what really matters to me now is what the next generation is doing. And so for me it seems already hopeful, it's like optimistic to make the assumption that there is a future for Black people. Yeah. A lot of the talk around climate at the moment is focused on population control. And when I look at the relationship between conservation, the conservation movement, which was colonial, and population control, and what's happening to climate now in terms of consumption. The pictures, for instance, of the light use, when you look at it and you see how dark Africa is compared to the rest of the world, I think it is optimistic to assume that there's a future for certain populations. When you look at their, the evolution of history over the last 500 years. And I like to think about that. In the video that you saw, the voice was my nephew. Like, he did all of the music. And I know every single person in that video. And there's a prize for anybody who can spot me as a student in Strathclyde University with my best friends.
That wasn't hard to spot.
So yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you very much. And Janine, how about you? Are you able to feel similarly positive about the future, despite?
Yeah, kind of. I think what I do is I start with a critique of where we are now.
Yeah.
So whatever issue I'm writing a poem about, for instance, I mean, the poem I just did about Grenfell Tower, part of the purpose of that poem is to give people permission to feel angry about it.
Yeah.
Because when the Grenfell Tower fire happened, like, we were all expected to be very sad. But actually, we were entitled to be angry. Because while it was defined as a tragedy, tragedy kind of suggests that it was, some kind of accident out of nowhere that couldn't have been prevented, but it could have been prevented. It happened for reasons, for political reasons. So I want you to, reflect and stir up the anger that people are entitled to feel about that. I think also in terms of the future, rather than use my poetry to set out a detailed view of what the future might look like, I kind of think the future is going to be shaped by the struggles of today. So I'll write poetry in service of those struggles. So I'll often write stuff directly in support of a particular campaign. I'm involved, as I think you said in the introduction, in a group called Poetry on the Picket Line. It does what it says on the tin. We turn up to picket lines and we do poetry, often to the alarm of the pickets. But generally they appreciate it by the end. And being an RMT member, I am often simultaneously the poet and the picket. So yeah, and often doing gigs at campaign events, union events, etc.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Patricia, I mean, you know, you've mentioned anger, Janine. The book is, it's so interesting to me that the way that you've selected and curated the pieces and the essays that follow what we're witnessing happening with the climate and with the planet is anger-inducing. But is that an emotion that you find seeps into your work, or is it something else that is affecting you, that creates what you do?
Well, I think, yes, I'm very angry. And a lot of the reason for that is that we do seem to just live with things, as Janine's saying. We put up with things that we really shouldn't put up with when we're in the position of doing better than that. Often, obviously, many people in the world have no option. They're still entitled to feel angry. But I think we here are entitled to feel angry and to actually feel that we must do something. Mm-hmm. So as artists, I think we're all the kind of artist that actually does want to do something in the service of something. And in my case, it's probably more about biodiversity than it is about climate. Mm-hmm. But these things are so interlinked that it really doesn't matter. But something that really interests me here, and I think in many other parts of the world, is this phenomenon of the shifting baseline. Mm-hmm. People get used to what it's like now. And, you know, they don't know what it was like in the past, how much better, how much more biodiverse. I think in social movements, that's probably not the case. It depends how far back you go, and maybe it never was better. But there certainly were better times in terms of biodiversity. But lots of people go out into what they think of as the wild, the middle of Rannoch Moor. You know, I've seen people doing all these sort of selfies, you know, here's me in the wild. Well, there's nothing wild about it, of course. And we talk about this process that has happened as one of loss. Well, it isn't loss, it's damage. And we can put it back. And although you may not agree with all the other aspects of some of the places where this is happening. I mean, some of them are owned by billionaires and so on, and there's a whole other story there elsewhere in the world. But I think everywhere where someone is tackling the loss, so-called, of biodiversity and bringing back a more lively landscape of ecology that works, then that should be applauded and also used as examples. And, you know, if we forget about this shifting baseline and we reckon on what it used to be like, we're not going to go back to what it was like, but we can go into something that is so much better. Yeah. I mean, let's do it. It may not be nearly enough. I suspect it will not be nearly enough. But at least it's something that we can do. So as an artist, I'm trying to further that sort of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're touching on something really important there, which is bearing witness to the issue. And it's not just raising awareness, but that is a big part of it. And I think that's something that all three of you are managing to do through your various art forms, is this notion that we're not going to let people forget what's going on or what's happened in the past or history or what's happening now, you know, particularly in your Grenfell poem. How much of bearing witness is something that drives you? Do you feel this kind of a responsibility to record what is or has happened? And how do you know that people are paying attention to that? Janine?
I have no idea whether people are paying attention or not. I'll just do it anyway. I think using art to record history is really important. I think politically, we have to understand how society changes historically in order to be able to influence how it changes in the future. I mean, one example, one poem that I regularly perform is called Stonewall Was a Riot. And so it's about the Stonewall riots in 1969, where the police raided a gay bar called the Stonewall Inn on Christopher Street in New York City, which used to happen all the time. And the clientele would usually just kind of go home with their tails between their legs. But on that night, they didn't. They fought back and they rioted for 3 nights. And in doing so, they replaced the previously existing kind of embarrassed homosexual tolerance lobby with a new militant, assertive gay liberation movement, which evolved into today's LGBT plus movement. And Pride originally started, the reason why Pride takes place in June each year is it started marking the anniversary of the Stonewall riot. So, point being, the roots of Pride are in a riot, okay? Not that you'd know that by going on Pride these days. You know, Stonewall riot, as one of the lines in a poem says, Starbucks did not sponsor it. So I think it's really important to, record those important episodes for history and record them in a way that illuminates the present and future struggles.
Mm-hmm. And in Clementine, we see some of that even in the short film that you've just shown us. These plaques around Glasgow and things like this. Are you also moved by bearing witness to what's happened to Black people in this country and beyond?
Yes, it wasn't my primary purpose. What I was doing is just trying to understand a problem in its context somehow, which is really just sifting through my experience, because a lot of the things that I put together for that film are things that I was noticing for the first time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I hadn't actually seen that plaque is by H&M on Princess Street. I saw it because I went around Edinburgh looking for things that I hadn't seen before. And I think that is the relevance of art for me, because that ties together the political with what I'm actually doing, which is not mainly aesthetic. Yeah, for me to use my eye and my voice is, I don't really have to do anything else, because just by doing that, it makes it political, right? Because the way that I used to think about art in the past was that you had to be highly educated and you had to be extremely expert, you had to belong to a particular class. And actually that was just about having the right to have an opinion about something, right? And so now, really sifting through my experience and saying things the way that I see them, that's art for me. And that makes it political, because my experience is no different really from anyone else's experience in the world. My suffering is no different from anyone else's suffering. But the fact that I'm the one that's speaking
do you have
important.
a sense of who you're speaking to?
I think I'm speaking to, the quote that occurs to me is Baldwin, who says, you think you've suffered. You know, you think your suffering is the deepest in the universe. I'm roughly paraphrasing. And then he said, and then you read. You know? So I think I'm speaking to whoever out there can relate to the experiences that I'm relating to. Yeah.
And it's interesting, Patricia, with your book and your work, I get the sense that you are a part of this, big community of photographers and scientists. And when you're putting something like this together, this is not necessarily a book that, everybody is going to have access to. Who are the people that you are particularly invested in reading this and taking from it what you've put together and how you've put it together? Who is it? The science community? Is it the photography community? Is it everybody?
That's actually a very difficult question, and it's something that's preoccupied me quite a lot while I was actually choosing what went into the book. I'm not sure if I can really answer it. I think the answer has been said already. It's whoever is ready for this to arrive with them. the scientific community know all this already,
Yeah.
and they're very enthusiastic about the book, as you can see on the reviews in Edinburgh University Press. There's no doubt about that. The photographic community are very much divided into people who think that photography should just be for its own sake still, and people who are reporters who are not really interested in the art world at all, and people in the middle who like to see several different levels of meaning in a photograph. And I think it's that third group to which I belong, and the people that are going to be interested in the book are those people. But it's neither of these communities really that I think thinking about. And what I've found, which has been very interesting, is that several people have written to me just out of the blue completely, and they're right across the spectrum, from poets, essayists, scientists, and you know, said how wonderful they thought the book as a whole was. And I'm not taking responsibility for this really in my own work, because it's everyone's work. It's a joint community activity, really. But people in many different disciplines have found it useful, and I find that wonderful. But you don't know who you're aiming at, because you will never know them, probably. And that works two ways. I mean, the people that I have been very much influenced by, most of them, well, they're either dead already or I don't know them, but they've made a fantastic difference to my life. They don't know this. Occasionally, you have the opportunity to tell someone this, and it's a wonderful thing to happen, whichever way round it goes. And it's also a historic thing. This can happen at any historic period. I mean, ancient images, ancient poems going back to Tang, China, you know, images from every period, whether they're paintings, photographs, can influence your life. So what I hope, and Angus also, as an academic and teacher, knows this too, that you hardly ever know where your work goes, where your books go. And you just have to hope that out there somewhere, someone's going to pick up the bottle on the beach, and that it will be valuable to them. And the other thing about it is, it also keeps people going. If they meet something that does help to inspire them, that gives them energy to continue with what they're actually doing. And I think it's that effect that I'm probably the most interested in.
And this is such a strength of art, right? You might never meet somebody who has influenced and affected you. They might be from, you know, generations ago, and they're no longer with us, but the effect of their work passes down, and it comes into your work, and your work passes down, and that's such a beautiful thing. And I think something that what I really appreciate about all three of you is this element, this really, really important element of collectivism, of collective action. We get this in the way in which this book is not just one photographer, it's not just you, it's a collection of different artists. We get this with you, Clementine, and, you know, Clementine and I are both part of the same writers network, the Scottish Beatbox network here. You're also a fellow for the Obsidian Foundation, which is a group of Black poets, which is a fantastic thing. And then yourself, Janine, being part of the RMT Union, and so much of what you are able to kind of do, and so much of how you learn, and you as the general you, comes from being in these collectives and these spaces. And yeah, I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about that from the three of you, of how you found collaboration and collectivism as a way to just keep going, really. Not even just to keep going, but yeah, inspiration and support. Clementine?
I think that was a little bit of my struggle at the beginning when I started to publish my work, because I wrote for a long time before I had anything published. And I found it was really hard to work and raise kids and also have a creative and political life. And I think that although I was brought up in a collective, because I was born and brought up in West Africa, somehow I really thought that I had to do everything on my own. And I really wasn't able to. And even when I was, it wasn't enjoyable. It was stressful and lonely and competitive, too competitive. And I found that the best work that I've done is work that I've done alongside other people, alongside them doing their own work, responding to their work. And I was always really a very, very, I read a lot from the time when I was really a small child. And I think that my socialization was into that world of books relating to each other. As you said, of writing, like the Gilgamesh, for instance. This is one of the oldest stories that exists in the world. And I could relate to it because it was in a book and I read it, you know. So I think to win the huge prizes and be on my own, I can safely say that because I haven't won any huge prizes.
Yet.
That's not my dream.
Yeah, thank you. Janine?
Yeah, as I explained before, a lot of what I write and how and where I perform is as part of collective struggles, collective movements, collective organisations, etc. But in terms of actually writing, I'll do that on my own. I mean, some poets work together and collaborate and stuff, but for me, it's all in my head and the way that I write it and the way I deliver it. Having said that, I think it's really notable that today's poetry and spoken word scene really does have a strong sense of collective and community about it. So I run a monthly spoken word night where I live, which is in Lewes in East Sussex, and it's really built a community of people around it who come every month. They'll maybe just watch, or they'll maybe do a poem or tell a story in open mic. And people, I've seen people just get confidence from each other and from being there in a really good way. And the other thing that's really noticeable about the poetry and spoken word scene is how diverse it is. So you go to your typical spoken word event and you'll have people of all genders, ethnicities, ages, etc., without anyone having to fly a big flag going, hello, aren't we diverse over here? It kind of seems to happen organically, and I think that's because spoken word is kind of, spoken word and poetry is quite a democratic medium. Basically, all you've got to do is open your mouth and let words come out. And it doesn't involve lots of expensive equipment or, you know, or you don't have to study it necessarily, although that can help. You just have to have something you want to rant about. And I think we all have that, don't we?
Definitely. And Patricia, what does your collective look like? I mean, how did you decide who to collaborate with, who to include in this book versus maybe some of the other photographers that you know?
Well, again, that was a very difficult situation. I had criteria for what the images had to be. They had to be something that had a message, but which also had a deeper metaphorical level on which they could be read, because I think those are the pictures that have power and go into people's subconscious and do useful work. So that was easy in a way, but choosing a few out of the enormous number that exist was difficult. I have to say, though, that all the collaborators were absolutely wonderful. I thought some of these people are so famous, they're never even going to reply to me when I write to them, you know. And I was just amazed that they did and how helpful they were. So that was fantastic. But the book also wouldn't exist without the organisation Studies in Photography, which is a part of the Scottish Society for the History of Photography, which has a very broad church approach to the whole subject of photography, which isn't always the case with photographic organisations, but this one does have, and it's based here obviously in Scotland. And the collaboration of them as publisher with Edinburgh University Press, who've also been marvellous, and the designer, who was fantastic, and the printer, the designer in Edinburgh, Ian McElroy, the printer, Bell and Bain and Jay Thompson in Glasgow, meant that there was a real Scottish element all through to the collaboration, despite it being a very international book.
Yeah.
And the other level, of course, is what the photographs actually show. And I can't speak for everyone's work there, but certainly in my case, going to Glenfeshie in the Cairngorms, I've got to know a whole lot of people there on the ground, their conservation manager and the stalkers, all the people who are bringing this change about that's happening in that landscape. And that's a whole community that have also been extremely helpful and welcoming for any of the enterprise that we've been doing there, which has happened over about 30 years. So there's a lot of long-term things involved from making the pictures, I'm sure in everyone else's case too, who made the other pictures, to the production of the book. And its dissemination. So it's not working together exactly because you can't really, my photographic practice, I'm not working together except with my partner Angus MacDonald, who's hiding over there in the corner, who's the pilot of our light aircraft in all our expeditions and much more. So we work very closely together, but mostly photography is a lonely business, and no one else can look through the viewfinder with you and see exactly what you're going to see, except that Angus quite often spots things looking out the other side of our tiny aircraft and says, you have to look at this one, and we do, and it's usually a great one. So lots of collaboration in a way.
It sounds like you live an absolutely incredible life, firstly, just flying around in a tiny aircraft. We are going to move on to one or two audience questions, if that is okay. So please don't feel shy. If anybody has a burning question, fire away. Oh, we also have a roaming mic, so pop your hand up and Ailey will come around to you. And if not, if you need... Oh, yeah, fabulous. Yeah. Right here. This side.
You might have to come to me. Sorry.
So like I'm an art historian, so that's like where I'm looking at things from. But I was thinking about like concepts of like things being sublime, and you know, like how when something is really horrifying but it becomes beautiful. And I was wondering if like that's something you think about in your practice, all of you.
So
does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. The line or the blur between something being horrifying and something being beautiful, the beauty and horror. Or the...
Yes, that's my one, isn't it, first? Well, things can be both. And it's not just that different people can see things differently, which they do. I've made some pictures which I found terrifying and which other people were prepared to buy and put on their wall or use for their publicity material or whatever, and I just could not believe it. So there's that whole thing. But part of the power of some pictures is, as on the cover of the Anthropocene book, the albatross chick with its stomach full of plastic. You know, it's a beautiful composition. It's like an ancient painting. So it draws you in because it's fascinating to look at. And then you see the horror of it. So these two things, as in life, I'm afraid, is probably the truth also, that horror and beauty can coexist. And they're both just words, after all. You know, I don't really know what to say about this, but obviously you can glamorize dreadful things. And I've tried in this book, in the photographs I've chosen and also in the texts that go with the images, not to allow that to happen. Yeah. But in a way, you can't totally escape it. And some people really use it in ways that I find unacceptable, so they are not in the book, even though they're famous. But I think it's just part of being a human, that you respond in these two different ways, and you can do the two things simultaneously. It's a terrifying fact.
I think that's true for so much of poetry as well, that especially political poetry. How do you perform? How do you write and perform something poignant about something so devastating without glamorizing it, without turning it into a spectacle?
Yeah, I mean, I had to go through that thought process around the Grenfell Tower fire poem, and also partly because, you know, it's got some strong wording in there, and I didn't want people to feel offended or upset by it or anything. And I actually went through a process where I kind of did a trial performance, if you like, to a Grenfell community group. And they loved it. And I thought, well, if they loved it, then I'm not sure anyone else has got the right to be offended by it. And they appreciated the use of strong language. And then I also performed it for the Fire Brigades Union earlier this year, and they were really appreciative of it as well. I think maybe one thing that can guide us here is what's been a slogan of the Labour movement for years, which is agitate, educate, and organise. So if you're trying to challenge something and change something, right, you've got to agitate, you've got to get people fired up about it, and then educate about it, and then get organised to do something about it. And we can't tiptoe around some of the horrors of oppression in the world. We've got to show it how it is, but then give people a sense of entitlement to be angry about it and to be willing to and able to do something about it.
And Clementine, as a storyteller yourself, you know, how do you tiptoe that line or approach those questions?
I have to say, I don't think about it very much at all. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to have an honest relationship to something which I'm seeing in front of me. And because the way that I look at things comes out of a perspective which most of my audience isn't going to be familiar with, I think I can pretty much guarantee that I'm going to offend, right? And then the question is, do I say something which I believe to be true or not? And I really think that if I've done my job, then there is a harmony in it, which means that people can read it or listen to it, and it reaches them at a level which can be disturbing, but there's also a harmony in it, which I think is beautiful. But I think that I'm very, very suspicious, and this is the reason why I looked at what people find beautiful in noses, right? I'm very suspicious of what people consider to be beauty anyway, yeah? And so I try not to think about it.
Fantastic. Well,
Can I come back?
Please
on that?
do.
Just, to both of you, really. Most people in this audience probably know what I'm going to say, but if you remember Jimmy Reid, who was a wonderful left-wing activist in Scotland when I was young, when we were students, he used to end his speeches saying that the most important thing for the left was freedom for whom to do what. Freedom itself was a wonderful thing. It may not be beautiful exactly, but it depends. It's just a word like everything else. And you can have something like this as an idea on a pedestal, but once you actually put it into practice in life, it very much depends on the contingencies around it. Yeah. So I think, yes, you have to look at your audience, but in a way, it doesn't matter what the audience thinks, because you are trying to identify a truth of some kind, and it's always a complicated truth, but you still have to just tease that out as much as you can.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really wonderful, I think, mixing of these wonderful three people, and getting to hear your perspectives on resistance in all these different ways is wonderful for me, and I'm sure wonderful for our audience as well. Time has rushed by, but the good news is all of us will be hanging around for a little bit after the event in case you would like to speak to anybody. We have books to be sold, potentially to be signed, definitely books. But please join me in thanking my three wonderful panelists and enjoying the rest of the festival. Thank you so much. Just, I could hear all three of you talk bravely, so if only we had 3 more hours.